All right, what is up? What is up? Hello, everybody. Another YouTube live show here tonight. Welcome in. Pull up a chair, make yourself comfortable, hop in that chat. Let's get this ball rolling. I know it's a little bit later tonight. A busy day today, and to be honest, I've been a little bit disconnected this weekend. Haven't been super dialed into what's going on. I watched about 5 minutes of the Heisman Trophy presentation. That was about it. And without college football, it just felt like a big empty void this weekend. So may have to work a little bit more today to bring you the content that you so rightfully deserve. But the Texas Longhorns, actually, and the Oklahoma Sooners are going to provide most of the fuel and the content for today's show because of events that have happened in the past week, including something that has just happened here within the last couple of hours, which is Texas signing Quinn Ewers, who was basically the hottest quarterback prospect on the market. Now, I guess I would say short of Arch Manning. Arch Manning overall is probably the biggest in a battle that's going to be watched, and a kid that Texas is in on, by the way. But this is a big deal for Texas to get Quinn Ewers. I'm not sure that anybody is really surprised after he was originally committed to Texas before decommitting back when Tom Herman was the coach, and that was one of the final nails in Herman's coffin. He went to Ohio State, enrolled early, and now has come back around. And as everybody is pointing out, is going to get a lot of money to hang out and be a Texas Longhorn after getting a lot of money to go be the fourth-string quarterback at Ohio State. So what does it mean for Texas? I know I teased this as like, is Texas back? I mean, look, Texas is not going to be back simply because of one quarterback. That's a tongue-in-cheek tease there into the video. You guys know me well enough to know what I think of Texas and how systemic the problems are there. It's going to go beyond just landing a quarterback like this, but it is a big step, and I'm not going to actually downplay some of the significance of this for Texas, but we will talk about that. I'm seeing a lot of you guys pointing out the rumor is a $4 million deal. Clearly, Texas has not been shy about getting out in front of the NIL thing with the $50,000 that they're paying their offensive linemen. It's going to help out Texas a lot. So we'll break it all down. Like, I think let's remember what Texas was with Sam Ehlinger at the peak of his powers. They did at least win 10 games and get to a Sugar Bowl. I think an outcome like that is certainly possible if Quinn Ewers is as advertised, but is Steve Sarkisian the guy actually there? Is he actually the guy that is going to be there to take them to that level and take Quinn Ewers to that level? Or is Quinn Ewers, as others have pointed out, just another Tate Martell, who's going to be a completely overrated prospect who generates all this hype and buzz and then never actually turns into much? I'm going to give him more credit than that, but we can certainly break that down as well. And it seems like a lot of you have some pretty poignant opinions about what's happening with Quinn Ewers and Texas and him going there. I'm honestly, the thing that I am most fired up and inspired to talk about tonight, and I was about to say this week, but I was like, what did we talk about earlier in the week? It's Oklahoma, man. And I know sooner I'm not making many friends in Norman, Oklahoma, much like I haven't made many friends in Ames, Iowa this season. But the coordinator hires, I just look at them and say, well, one guy is a completely controversial figure that turned the other way at rape allegations at Baylor and had to go to the NAIA because he was so blackballed after everything happened. And Oklahoma is going to comfortably make that hire after having the Joe Mixon incident in 2014 where he's caught on camera slugging a woman at a Pickleman's sandwich shop. I don't think Oklahoma should be in the business of hiring a guy like that. Plus, the defensive coordinator is just this like journeyman guy that was an assistant at Clemson that's coming along with Brent Venables. I don't know. Underwhelming to me and certainly controversial at the same time. I would not be thrilled about that if I were a Sooner fan, but I digress. I know that I'll get salty K-State fan. Chad, I mean, I'll be honest, man, like I am less scared of Oklahoma than I have been in probably a decade with the staff that Brent Venables has and the fact that it's going to be a head coach learning on the job in Brent Venables right now. And I understand that that's worked out very well at Oklahoma over the years. So maybe I will have plenty of egg on my face, but Lincoln Riley came out and proved himself right away in 2017 by going to the national championship. Well, on the verge of the national championship game. I forget that they lost that Rose Bowl. I think Lincoln Riley was elite. I'm not convinced that Brent Venables is going to be an elite coach. I think the coordinator hires are somewhat underwhelming. I don't know. I am not blown away by what's happening at Oklahoma. I am not. And certainly I understand the response from Oklahoma fans. You guys have been jilted for one of the first times ever. You're jilted lovers in this college football world, which everybody else seems to experience all the time. You guys don't experience it very often. It's been quite funny and amusing for the rest of us to look at you all act like that. But I feel like the response has been a little bit over the top to Venables and what he is. It's fine if you want to be excited about it and you're an Oklahoma fan. That's okay. But I think if you take a step back and look at it with a more objective lens, there are more question marks right now with the Oklahoma program, certainly, than there were when Lincoln Riley was the head coach. And I do think there's a lot of revisionist history going on right now with Oklahoma fans and what Lincoln Riley was and where that program was going based on how jilted that you all feel right now. So, yes, we all have our biases. I am a fan of a school that, has been adversely affected by Oklahoma in the abstract with them going to the SEC. But to be honest, I'm not really an Oklahoma hater typically on a week in, week out basis. I really haven't been since the early 2000s when K-State and Oklahoma were going at it all the time with some really great battles. That's not really where I've been. So I'm not really like an Oklahoma hater. I would just like to make that point. I digress. We'll talk about Oklahoma's hires there, some of the pushback I've had from Oklahoma fans because it has been aplenty. It has been aplenty. And we did get a Joe Castiglione statement, by the way, on the Jeff Lebby hired offensive coordinator. I just think there are more questions that need to be answered and that people are owed more answers about this. If Oklahoma, specifically Oklahoma, a school with its checkered past in this department, is going to be the school to make this hire. We have good news for Big 12 head coaches once again. Frankly, that probably could have been the lead of this video, although we did talk about that midweek. Kalani Sitake, BYU's head coach, signs an extension. Basically seems like he leveraged BYU with that Oregon interview, which there is nothing wrong with at all. That's absolutely what he should have done coming off of the 2 years back-to-back that he's put together. And the success that he's had, and BYU did the right thing by stepping up and paying him. And I'm sure that they were going to anyway, whether or not that Oregon interview actually happened. A pretty smart business all the way around, and that seems like a fit that will work very, very well. All of that seems like it makes a lot of sense, and it makes more sense even than Sitake at Oregon. And Oregon also did not make any kind of run at Matt Campbell or Luke Fickell or Dave Aranda, the three coaches that have been so coveted by everybody else that are going to stay put in the league this year heading into next year. And, of course, when I say the league, we're including the four incoming schools into the league as well. I had a back and forth with a friend of mine that I really respect that covers the ACC about my statements on Clemson, which is another thing that needs to be discussed today. And I've discussed it a little bit here on this channel, but what is the future of Clemson and, more importantly, the ACC going to be in all of this as the Pac-12 has landed a massive big fish and now looks like they may be able to get their big boy back in the game? What's going to happen in the ACC with Clemson now losing both coordinators and their athletic director? Because so often you hear coaches talk about needing the unity. They need the cohesion between athletic director, coach, all the way on down to make everything work very well. Clemson has really lost a lot of that, and Dabo has not been a guy that's super adaptable. Like, he was really slow to come around on the transfer portal until they basically got to the point where they were forced to open themselves up to it more this year. I think that it is legitimate to ask the question, like, what is going to happen of Clemson, and therefore what is going to happen of the ACC, because we saw what the ACC looks like when Clemson is even just a decent team, decent to good team, whatever you classify 9-3 as opposed to the dominant force that they have been. So everybody's a little sensitive these days in the college football world, just from what I've been able to pick up. Those in ACC country, those in Norman, Oklahoma, everybody's a little sensitive right now. There's been a ton that has happened, and I think it just leads to a lot of really fascinating discussion about everything that's going on. Happy for BYU, by the way, that they got that done with Sitake. And I've had this on the list now for a little while. We can talk some Big 12 bowl games. Nothing's happening until December 28th. So we've got a ways to go here, a little over 2 weeks before we actually get bowl games. But I do think a fun exercise would be actually ranking the Big 12 bowl games. What are you most excited to see? And we can start breaking some of that down. Also, if you guys have any ideas, by the way, toss them to me on Twitter at JL Kurtz. Toss them to me in the chat. Content ideas that you want to see coming up here with us now pseudo into the offseason. Not totally, but kind of in the offseason here. And now that we have some people flowing in here to the chat. I will remind you, if you guys could, one, all like the video. All of you that are watching this, if you go like the video, it would help me out a lot. Just the algorithm. And I would appreciate it if you did so. Also, comment. Certainly that helps as well. But if you want to make sure that your question or comment gets to the top of the chat, gets my attention, gets mentioned specifically, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Not only will that make sure that your question or comment gets my attention, but it also just supports the work that I do here on the channel and is much appreciated as always. So there we go. That's the outline for today. That's the lineup that we have. We're going to dive right into Quinn Ewers in Texas here, because that is the real story of the hour. And I mean that quite literally, that it has come out now that Texas is apparently going to land Quinn Ewers, who was a 5-star quarterback who left school a year early, famously for an NIL deal to go to Ohio State this past year. He came in fairly late, and at that point was basically relegated to being the 4th-string quarterback at Ohio State. So he comes back out now, and the interesting part of all this is basically this all worked out the way that it was supposed to originally for Texas, where they were going to land him as a part of this recruiting class before he decided to reclassify, get in early to Ohio State, and ditch his commitment to Texas. But here we go. Burnt Orange Nation. For the second time in as many years, quarterback Quinn Ewers is committed to join the Texas Longhorns. He had originally committed in August of 2020. Was going to be the cornerstone of a class under Tom Herman and Mike Urich. 6 weeks later, he decommitted and joined Ohio State. Now, the interesting part about this was that it was clear Ewers just wanted to come back home to Texas, to the state of Texas. And so he was looking at Texas Tech. He was looking at TCU. It looked like Texas A&M was involved for a minute, but they have a commitment from another elite quarterback, and apparently Jimbo didn't really want to entertain that very much. And once that happened, it did feel like this was always going to be the way that it would go. He had already been committed. He's a Texas kid, clearly went away from home, did not fully enjoy that experience. You knew that Texas would fork up the money. I'm seeing people talk about the rumored $4 million for Ewers. And, honestly, I have to agree, Jeff. I see Jeff in the chat. Ewers and Texas deserve each other. I mean, it does just seem like a very Texas match made in heaven, right? I mean, you have the quarterback who was very, very hyped, perhaps overhyped initially coming out, pulling off a move that, look, I'm never going to knock a kid for going and getting the money and getting 7 figures basically to enroll early and go to Ohio State. If I had the opportunity to do that right now, or if I had the opportunity to do that when I was his age, I would have done the same thing. I'm not going to begrudge anybody for that, but it looks like in hindsight, like it may not have been the best career move. Regardless of what you think of the financials, if we're just talking about his career, that may have set him back a little bit. And now he's having to go through this process again to actually get through to Texas. I don't know. Maybe it'll be something that he says at the end of his career really helped. But I can see the angle that you're pitching there, like overhyped, about to be overpaid. If he's going to get $4 million to come to Texas, overhyped, overpaid, and ultimately will just wind up going through a bunch of 5 or 6 lost seasons at Texas. Like, totally get that line of thinking, and I think there is some truth to that probably. And a kid that has been through this sort of saga and this sort of drama and has all of this kind of circus hanging around him, right or wrong, because I don't know that that's really his fault. As a kid, I don't know how much it really is his fault that you can blame that there was that much hype built around him, and maybe some of the people around him really did some of that. But I can see how you would say, yeah, that's a very Texas kind of vibe going on with the kid coming into the 40 acres to go play in Austin. I agree. I'm with you there. I agree. However, that doesn't mean I'm going to say that this kid's career is over or the experience at Ohio State really means. No. I mean, he came in so late. He didn't really have much of a chance. CJ Stroud took over that job. He winds up being a Heisman finalist. There were just a lot of things working against Ewers as far as that goes. And look, it was kind of a money grab, but that's taking advantage of the first time that these college players actually have an opportunity to hit the money grab. So again, I will not begrudge him for a second there. I think he absolutely can be very good at Texas. And the other thing I would say is, I know there's a lot of like sour grapes to an extent in here. And I'm not trying to call you out, Texas Tech fans, because I'm the same way. I look for every opportunity that I can to rip on Texas. And like my school, obviously, is not coming anywhere near sniffing a quarterback of this kind of talent. And I think it was freaking awesome that Joey McGuire got Texas Tech like legitimately involved in this sweepstakes for Quinn Ewers. I think that's a great sign for Tech. But at the end of the day, like Tech clearly really wanted him. I think Tech fans, you guys would have really wanted him, right? So it's very easy to sit here on the other side of it and be like, oh, match made in heaven. The billionaire rich kid is going to go choose Texas and overhyped, and he's going to be Tate Martell and all of this. I pump the brakes on that a little bit. I think it's an opportunity for Texas. But that's basically where, yeah, I see Tech police is coming for Kurtz. Pretty good timing there. Thank you, Birdsword. I think the timing of all of this sets up an opportunity for Texas, and that's as far as I will go. Not saying Texas is back. I think they have an opportunity to really build something here with him committed, because I take it back to Sam Ehlinger. And Sam Ehlinger, I think, is in a different class. Now, look, I've never actually seen Quinn Ewers play, but I don't think Sam Ehlinger generated this sort of hype. I don't know that Sam Ehlinger would have, warranted a $4 million salary, more or less, coming out of high school to play for Texas, even if that had been allowed at that point in time. But he is the best thing that I've seen at quarterback for Texas since Colt McCoy left campus all the way back in 2010, whenever it was that happened. So there's a shot here. Like, if he is really legit, if he's close to what he was hyped up to being, it would be hard to really screw that up. Now, if there is somebody that can screw it up and screw up a lot of talent, it is definitely Texas. They have a well-documented history of that. But it would be difficult to screw that up. And one thing that we do know about Steve Sarkisian is that with elite offensive talent, he clearly can produce a very good product. What did we see at Alabama? It's elite offensive talent all over the place, elite skill position players. There was a ton working for him there, obviously. I understand that, much more so than even Texas. If Ewers is that good, there's still more of a decided talent advantage that you have at Alabama than there is at Texas. But I think that's fairly translatable, right? If he has weapons that are superior to everybody else, he can put together a pretty good offense. And, look, this year Texas did deal, like Casey Thompson. I saw the pictures that surfaced of his hand where he was dealing with a crazy hand injury for the back half of the season, flipping back and forth between he and Hudson Card. Those two guys just didn't really have it. If Quinn Ewers has it and is a clear cut above those guys, I think there's reason to believe Sark can put together a really exciting offense. Xavier Worthy's an incredibly enticing option to work with at receiver there as well moving forward. There is plenty of reason to be excited here if you're a Texas fan. Absolutely. Wouldn't deny that for a second. And I think there's a good chance. I think there is a decent chance that this does wind up being something very significant for Texas. And they got pretty fortunate with the circumstances that a kid like this broke back to them. But you're always going to have that opportunity if you are Texas. The caution here, and the real question is this kid legit? Is this kid legit and has some of the things that he has gone through already, like, stunted the growth here? I think the worry for me would be, like, has Quinn Ewers gotten the treatment of like a guy being rushed through the minor leagues too fast that got up to the big leagues and had some of his confidence ruined, and now is not going to be back in that sort of form when he gets out there with an actual chance to play? That would be my question. I see Wolf 58 in there. I don't know if someone is suggesting that Texas actually wouldn't start. If Ewers wouldn't actually start at Texas, I mean, I would say 1,010% Ewers is going to start at Texas next year. I mean, you guys watch Hudson Card and Casey Thompson throughout this year? I probably shouldn't be so hard on Casey Thompson. Thompson, I suppose, was fine. But, yeah, I would anticipate Ewers is going to come play right away this year. Not just because he's going to want to after riding the bench at Ohio State last year, but also because Texas just doesn't have much in the way of other options, and they really need to sell hope. I mean, that's another thing. Like, after all the dreadfully mediocre to just dysfunctional organized mess seasons that Texas has had over the last 15 years, they're going to need to sell legitimate hope. You need to have this kid playing. He's definitely going to be playing. But I would just worry about what this experience did to him long term. Like, it's not even just that he went to Ohio State and he took 2 snaps this year. It's not even just that he went there and rode the pine and didn't play. It's that there was such a media circus around him because he's come up at this time where, yes, it is very financially beneficial for him to arrive and get the 7 figures that he did to go there. But with that comes a lot of attention and sort of a media circus surrounding him and just a lot of different criticisms. And he's, like this is a guy that's a big enough deal, plus with the money and NIL and how hot of a topic that is in college athletics, that like he's going to be a topic and was a topic on some of the, first take shows of the world, like the bigger sports shows, national sports talking heads were talking about him and are going to talk about him. And the spotlight is just as bright as it could possibly be on a high school kid coming out who now has experienced some failure, where he made the move. He went to the place, like the place that you want to go, basically, outside of what Oklahoma used to be. If you're going to be a quarterback, I'm not sure that there's much other better place right now to get yourself to the NFL than there would be at Ohio State. He went there and got severely humbled. Does that turn into a success story where he uses that as the best thing that ever happened to him, or does it break him? Jury is obviously still out on that. I have no idea. I don't know Quinn Ewers. I don't know what the circumstances are going to be like around him like that. But I worry about a kid in this situation because of everything that has happened here. Kind of like being a child star too, right? Like maybe this isn't a totally sort of fair comparison, but like the child star that just gets everything, so you just get rushed to it and you're big and huge early. And then what happens if you experience some failure, and can you handle that? And, stunts people's growth, like all that sort of thing. I think there's just a lot of dynamics at play here that will be very fascinating to watch with Ewers in Texas, but you absolutely take him. And if Texas Tech had landed him, I would have come on here and lauded that as just a massive, massive move, shifting some of the power potentially in the Big 12. Not that Texas has much of it right now, but they're always obviously a threat to go reclaim some of that. And whenever there's a guy with this level of talent, like a pretty transcendent talent here, you do have to worry, if you're somebody not rooting for Texas, which is most of us in here, you do have to worry about what that can do for the Longhorns. I see John Drew in there. John, his NIL deals required him to start a certain number of games. Is that true at Ohio State? I didn't know the details on that, if that is actually true. I don't know. And the other part of this too, there are so many angles with this. I'm seeing just a lot of conversation about Texas and the money that they're giving these guys with the NIL deals and what's going to happen of that, what's going to come of that. And I just don't look, it is what it is. Texas, of course, that was always going to be the case when NIL came into our lives. Like they were always going to be able to pay more, outbid people, get things organized that way. We know they have money to throw around. That was always going to happen. That was always going to be a thing, right? That they would be able to outbid people. And that's pretty much what's been going on right now. Even if I'm not trying to say Texas has been paying guys, who the hell knows how much of that's been going on under the table or whatever, but I'm just saying they have a resources advantage. So the currency has changed where now money actually comes into play. Beforehand, the currency was just, what do you have in terms of, what can you offer me from a historical perspective? What can you offer me from I'm going to win. I'm going to have the best coaches. I'm going to have the best facilities. I'm going to have the most exposure. Like Texas has always had those advantages over everybody else. So yes, they now do have an advantage with the money they can dole out there. But do we really think that's why Quinn Ewers is coming to Texas? Do we really think that's why? And look, I believe in Joey McGuire and his recruiting ability at Texas Tech, but like we think that ultimately is why Texas gets the commit over Texas Tech, and this would have been different had it been 5 years ago. I don't think that's really the case. So I don't make as big of a deal out of that as some people seem to, that like, oh, the sport's going to be screwed and Texas is going to just dominate everybody. Look, they've already dominated the whole league recruiting wise for years outside of Oklahoma, but the results don't back that up. We know this. Texas will get talent. They'll continue to get talent, even though the system has just shifted a little bit and changed a little bit. So I don't know. I see Chad like, yes, the money is the sole reason. I don't know, man. I disagree with that. And it's nothing against Tech. Like it's nothing against Tech at all. But this is the hotshot kid from the state of Texas. He was already committed there once. It is the big in-state institution. I just think that would have happened either way. I think Joey McGuire showcased his chops very well to get them legitimately in that conversation and make it a two-team race basically between Tech and Texas. But I think that was just always going to happen. Now, if you are into the schadenfreude of hoping for Texas losing and taking pleasure in Texas's pain, here's your ultimate scenario. Your ultimate scenario is that with this, Texas has now torpedoed their shot at getting Arch Manning. Arch Manning is really that guy. He's really that guy. Quinn Ewers is not. He's damaged goods now. He's going to be Tate Martell. And so Texas is just mortgaged the future by not getting Arch Manning and put it on Quinn Ewers, and then that'll blow up in their face. There's your scenario if you're a Texas hater. I think that's at least in play. I don't know that I would say that that's going to happen, but I think that's at least something that's in play. Boy, you guys are lively all over the place here. Arch is going to Oklahoma. I will eat my shorts if Arch Manning goes to Oklahoma. I understand why you hope that, because Ole Miss had gotten themselves into it with Arch Manning in part because of Levy, right, who's been hired at Oklahoma now. But there's also an obvious connection there for Arch Manning with Eli going to Ole Miss. We don't think like some of that had anything to do with it. I'm not going to go play for Lincoln Riley. Yes, I could buy that Arch Manning would do that. To go play for Brent Venables, yeah, I don't know about that. I digress. Let me remind you guys of a couple of things here now that the chat is a little bit bigger. If you could like the video, it would really help me out. Those of you that are in here, it doesn't cost you anything. Just like the video, help support the channel, help support this video, get more eyeballs on it. I would really, really appreciate it. Also, if you do want to donate, not only out of the goodness of your heart to support the channel and support what I do, it'll also get your question or comment tacked up to the top of the chat, so make sure that I see it. You can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That is another way, certainly, to contribute here. I see Bryson in there. Hey, John, did you hear about the Aggieville stuff? I did. That was I'll just interject really quickly here. I'm sure there are some K-State fans in there. But, yeah, there was a shooting in Aggieville, which is the bar district in Manhattan, Kansas, and it was on a huge football recruiting weekend. And I don't know that I want to get into the details much further than that in terms of who was involved there. But let's just say I don't think it was – I feel very badly for the K-State football staff that happened on a football recruiting weekend. So, yes, I did see that happen. And, by the way, just hoping to God that everybody winds up being okay out of that, because that was pretty scary stuff with a shooting there. So first time that it happened since 2015. So, it's not something that happens often at all in Manhattan, which, again, I lived there for 10 years. It's a college town. There is not much in terms of that goes on. But to have it happen on a big recruiting weekend, that's not good. That's not good. Chad, I would love to know your sources here on the Ole Miss recruitment of Arch Manning. You seem very connected here and very convinced of everything pro Oklahoma right now. You seem like you must have some very good sources. So I don't know if you'd like to contribute to the channel a little bit more like that with your sourcing. That'd be great. That'd be great. Saying that Levy was the main reason that Arch was interested in Ole Miss. Okay. I'm sure it'll translate very well to Oklahoma to come play for a career defensive coordinator. Sure, that'll work out really well. Speaking of Oklahoma, they have announced their coordinator hires, and this is where Oklahoma fans that are in here are going to probably disagree with me, and we will spark some things here. But to be honest, man, I looked at the two coordinator hires, which were Jeff Levy coming in from Ole Miss, and then Ruff. The guy's last name is Ruff. I had his Wikipedia pulled up earlier. What the hell happened to that? It's a career journeyman guy. I was so amazed at the resume of the Oklahoma defensive coordinator hire here. I was just like, what, really? Okay, Ted Roof. Anyway, I'll get to that part in a second, because that part, look, if we're gonna go back and forth and argue about the coaching chops, the football coaching chops of somebody, which is Oklahoma's defensive coordinator, that's one thing. And I wouldn't be ever I don't think that matters as much. Even from a football standpoint, that doesn't matter as much, because that Venables will have his hand all over the defense, right? He's going to have to learn more of a CEO role and probably be more hands-off than he has been, but his fingerprints will be all over that, so you don't worry about that much as the offensive coordinator. That was always going to be the one that meant more. And I love this from Trash Can, very appropriately in here. Trash Can. Kansas State will never amount to anything great. Let's all be real for a minute. That's a great deflection, but like we're talking about mighty Oklahoma here, Trash Can. I understand that you are likely an Oklahoma fan here in this discussion. We're talking about your school because you guys are big, mighty, powerful, proud Oklahoma, right? So why would you turn it into a Kansas State discussion if we're talking about college football's elite here? You should be held to an elite standard. That's what we're talking about here. This is not, so it just cracks me up when that gets deflected back to my school. And that does not faze me on what my opinion is of Oklahoma's hires and how that will translate to what Oklahoma expectations are. But if you want to cop out on having a legitimate, intelligent conversation on that, then, continue being a trash can in the chat here. Okay. So Jeff Lebby, I mean, look, coaching chops wise, you can see why you'd want to hire the guy. He was on our Brio staff at Baylor for like 8 years. I think 6 or 7 years. I think it was 08 to 14 that he was at Baylor. Then he gets basically cast off into exile where he has to go to an NAIA school and basically rebuild his image until he gets hired at UCF. And then he goes to Ole Miss. And it's hard to argue with what the Ole Miss offense has been. Now, again, I would also point out, Oklahoma fans, Lane Kiffin is the head coach there. Clearly, Lane Kiffin is an offensive whiz kid, a guru, whatever word it is that you want to throw out there. Like Lane Kiffin is somebody who's going to have his handprints all over the offense. So I would question some, how much of it is Jeff Lebby and how much of it is Lebby working with a guy who's clearly a great offensive mind in Lane Kiffin, regardless of what you think of him as a human being or a head coach overall. He's a well-established, very good offensive mind. So, I would just like to submit that into the discussion here as well. But I'll give Lebby credit because the track record at UCF and then obviously at Baylor, he's been around a lot of really good offensive minds, and the Ole Miss offense has been really, really fun and incredibly productive. So I get why you would want the guy on the field. From a purely on-field perspective, that makes sense. That is not a hire that I would have hated on at all. That is not, I would have said, that makes sense. That's a pretty big boy hire. That seems like a really good guy to hand your offense to. But the problem here is, what are we doing about the off-the-field stuff for Oklahoma? A school that already went through the Joe Mixon saga in 2014, where he absolutely slugs a girl in Pickleman's, which is a sandwich shop there, and winds up still playing at Oklahoma. And Bob Stoops really stuck his neck out at that point in time for Joe Mixon to allow him to play at OU. There have already been issues here along this road. Now, that's a little bit different than the sexual assault, domestic violence, but they're basically in the same family of things that you do not want to be messing with at all. So, yes, Chad, I'm going to bring up Joe Mixon when it's in the context of now you bringing in another guy who has contributed to football players being very harmful to women and daughters of folks that have been on campuses. If you are unfamiliar, Jeff Lebby at Baylor was mentioned in a 2016 Title IX lawsuit by one of the victims of everything that happened at Baylor. Said she was assaulted 3 times by a Baylor running back, twice after she had reported the initial incident in March of 2014 to Lebby, then Baylor's running backs coach. So that's the issue there, is that he basically looked the other way, and Lebby looked the other way and was a part of the problem there at Baylor, where this culture was created where nobody did anything about all these sexual assaults that happened. I think most people are familiar with the general outlines of that story. And again, it was bad enough that Lebby had to go, after being on staff at Baylor for 6 years where they were winning Big 12 championships, he had to go to an NAIA school to even get a coaching job to sort of rehab his image and come back. And now, look, obviously the way has been paved by UCF and Ole Miss to get him back to this point where he's had a rehabbed image enough to be hired at Oklahoma. But I don't like this because I feel like it's just a case of eventually people just sort of forget and some of this stuff fades. Same thing with like Kendall Briles and some of the others that have now still been coaching that were associated with everything that happened at Baylor. We all just kind of forget. And after a while, it's like, all right, whatever, he can come along. Oklahoma should be held to a pretty high standard when they're a school that's already had a pretty major issue with that. And yes, I know that Joe Mixon got kicked off the team for a year, but he still wound up playing football at Oklahoma after what it is that happened. How many strikes do you get here? How many chances do you get? Here's Joe Castiglione's statement. Oklahoma's athletic director. He said, "We vetted him from every angle on and off the field. We understand why additional questions have been raised around his candidacy, which is why we did our due diligence, completed a thorough review and background check, and spoke to his previous employers throughout the process. The reports we received from Baylor, UCF, and Ole Miss were consistent. They spoke highly of him as a person, his relationships within the programs, as well as how he develops his players, his recruiting ability, and, of course, his football acumen. At every turn throughout our review, we received assurance of the content of his character, his commitments to compliance and safety, and his desire to contribute to the development of winning programs in the manner we expect. It is abundantly clear he also knows and will embrace OU's expectations of him both on and off the field." Okay, great statement by Castiglione, but I don't know, have we checked with the woman who filed this lawsuit, how she feels about him continuing to get jobs? Have we, has Levy made statements about what happened, what he's learned from it, being in a different place? I just think there need to be a lot of questions lobbed here. Can Joe Castiglione answer for what parents who are sending females to the Oklahoma campus would be thinking and feeling about this hire? I feel like there's a pretty intense line of questioning that would need to happen about this. And I'm not sure that I've really seen that it's actually happened. And I see allegations, no evidence in there from Brandon. What happened is, in large part, the lawsuit was tossed out because of the statute of limitations, the stuff with Levy, the statute of limitations being referenced there. So it had been too long since 2014 when it happened, which to me is, that's a pretty lame excuse to be coming out and saying hey, we're going to drop this whole thing. Again, this is all about an Oklahoma standard. You can't find somebody else that you can go hire, not dealing with that. You went from Lincoln Riley, this elite offensive mind without anything in the way of controversy on that level. The controversy with Lincoln Riley is complaining about sportsmanship, right? When Baylor is, beating you, to now this, it's just, to me, you downgraded at head coach and now you're bringing in controversy as your offensive coordinator. I don't love it. I just have a lot of questions here. I would question Oklahoma's vetting on that when they are a school that's already had some issues. And I think it just is something that deserves to be called out. And I think Oklahoma fans are pretty quick in general. I don't want to stereotype everybody, but I think Oklahoma fans in general just kind of move on and are like, no, man, this is all great. This is all great. We got rid of what is it you guys are calling him? That B out west, whatever, a TBOW. We got rid of that guy out there and we're moving on and everything's great. And it's never been better at Oklahoma. No, you guys need to take a step back a little bit and look at some of the chinks in the armor here. There are a lot of question marks, both morally and on the field, in terms of what's happened now at Oklahoma. And Gilbert says in there, OU only cares about winning. They don't care about morals. I'm not even saying that that's completely true here, but this is a very questionable one. And if you can't even see that, this is very much a gray area, a very questionable gray area, then I'm sorry, I can't help you. If you want to say, look, I trust Joe Castiglione, I trust Joe C. They did their vetting. He's already going to coach other places. I'm going to be okay with it. Okay, that's one thing. But if you can't at least admit why people would, like myself, would raise major questions about this, then I think you're just very much in denial and pretty blinded by crimson and cream glasses here. Baylor Bear 03, thank you for the donation. I'm sorry I kind of got off on a tangent there before I answered your question here. But Baylor Bear 03, very much appreciate the donation and for you hanging out in the chat today. He says, making sure Texas and Oklahoma don't win the Big 12. You're welcome, Baylor. Yes, well, thank you for that, Baylor, and Oklahoma State for that matter as well, for beating Oklahoma and Bedlam and getting to the Big 12 title game and ensuring that this year we did have a Big 12 championship game that drew 8+ million people. and killed the Pac-12 and the ACC championship games in terms of viewership because people wanted to watch because there were high stakes, aka going to the college football playoff, which happened between two teams that were a part of the Irate Eight, the Left Behind Club, that everybody wanted to just crap all over back in July. So yes, thank you for that, Baylor Barrow 3. If you'd like to donate to the channel, you can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something and get your question or comment tacked up to the top to me. And yes, not only that, but also just supports the work that I'm doing here on this channel. I see John Drew rather says, I agree with you. There will be questions brought up at the next press conference, according to some beat writers. Okay, that's good. I didn't know the timeline. I have not paid close enough attention to the Oklahoma media schedule and what was happening as far as the media availabilities there. And I would certainly hope that happens. And look, the Oklahoma beat is pretty big, and there are a lot of guys that I definitely really respect. I mean, look, I listen to the Athletic Pod with the One True Pod on the Athletic with Jason Kersey, along with Max Olson, but Kersey, who's on the Oklahoma beat, definitely respect him. I think you guys know, I love Eddie Radosevich. I think he's one of the funniest college football follows out there on Twitter for sure, and does a very good job. You guys have seen my videos with Todd Lisenby on this channel, a good friend of mine in the industry who does radio in Oklahoma City and covers Oklahoma. I have a lot of respect for a lot of the people that are there, and it is big media market there in Oklahoma City, at least a major media market relative to the rest of college football typically. And so I would hope that some questions do get asked there. Easy Mango. Maybe we should hire some more K-State coaches. Yeah, well, that worked back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know if it works quite the same these days. I don't know that it works quite the same these days, unfortunately. It pains me to admit that. Oregon passed on hiring any Big 12 coaches. Oregon did not hire. It didn't seem like they really made a run at any. They did not have interest in any of the Big 12 coaches that have been mentioned for basically every big job that came open. And that is just one of the most miraculous things about this whole offseason of the coaching carousel so far. It was the wildest college football coaching carousel maybe ever, right? I mean, has there ever been – I can't imagine that there's ever been a year where more major jobs opened and you had 3 red-hot coaching candidates in Fickell, Campbell, and Aranda that didn't wind up with a single one of those jobs. You kept every single one of those coaches. Oregon did not seem to have interest. Sataki got an interview. Chip Kelly got a little bit of run and an interview. It winds up being Dan Lanning from Georgia. After it sounds like Justin Wilcox turned them down, which is a crazy – the head coach at Cal, sub 500 at Cal, turned Oregon down when he's an Oregon kid. He was grew up in Eugene. Pretty crazy story. I mean, the Oregon job in and of itself, I feel like by the time we got to it, everybody was so exhausted with the whole carousel that there wasn't a lot of talk about it because it was just, by comparison, we all had some coaching carousel fatigue, and it was not quite the bombshell that Brian Kelly going to LSU was or Lincoln Riley going to USC was. But that's still pretty wild that Wilcox turned Oregon down. They had Chip Kelly involved there for a second, and then they wind up going with a guy who just 6 years ago was a GA at Alabama in Lanning. So pretty crazy stuff there. Big win for the Big 12. And again, just kind of backs up the fact that Fickell, I believe Cincinnati fans now, when they say this guy probably isn't going to leave unless it's for Ohio State or Notre Dame was always the other one out there, right? And now Notre Dame's probably not going to come open for at least a couple more years. I don't know. It seems like Fickell's probably going to be in place, right? When the Big 12 starts. Matt Campbell, I've already explained to you what I think his situation is. I don't think he's going anywhere because he's in a spot where fans won't complain about going 7-5 when you have a preseason top 10 team and you can still make $4 million a year and not deal with the crazy expectations or a crazy fan base. It's a pretty good job. And not something that I would be super eager to leave. And Aranda, I guess Aranda maybe is still more of a wild card. He's definitely, asserted his commitment to Baylor as much as he can publicly right now. But what happens long-term with that? Is that going to stick? Aranda's just a tough read to me, right? And some of that's because he's just he's just a very quiet, stoic guy. And you saw that even when Baylor wins the Big 12 championship, right? Baylor wins the Big 12 championship, and the guy's on one of the most thrilling plays you'll ever see. The guy's just totally stoic on the sideline. So he's a tough read for obvious reasons there. But I certainly hope for Baylor's sake that he sticks around for a while. Either way, it seems like the Big 12 is going to be in pretty good shape from a coaching standpoint. You also have, by the way, Mike Gundy in there, who was winning League Coach of the Year awards for the job that he did this year, and doing it in a different way with his defense. Now, I know that he lost his defensive coordinator. Those are tough shoes to fill there, man. But the coaching is going to be pretty good in the new look Big 12 when the league actually gets underway. R Webb, I appreciate the I'm laughing at something else in the chat here. I'll get to it in just a second. R Webb, thank you for the donation. And our web says, have you seen the Athletic article where Miami says if there is an improvement to the ACC media contract, they would have to explore leaving the ACC? I did not see that, actually. Let me Google that so I can read it after this. Miami, ACC, the Athletic. Now, that is pretty funny on a number of levels. I mean, one, look, I'm all here for ACC chaos, and that is not great news if you're the ACC after looking at what's happening to Clemson right now, which is another point that I continue to make. They lost both coordinators. Dabo's not a guy that's dealt with change all that well or just had to deal with it much at all, and then also lost his athletic director going to Miami. I think the ACC could be in some legitimate trouble here with Florida State still fairly down. The other part about that, though, is just how rich is that for Miami to be the team that comes out and complains? If Clemson were to come out and complain, that's one thing. That makes sense. But Miami, I don't know. If I were the ACC brass, I would just kind of be looking at them dude, really? Really? You guys, the Texas of the ACC, you guys are going to be the ones complaining about this league and saying we need to leave because this media contract's not good. Nobody wants to watch Miami football right now. Miami sitting here pounding the table get us a better TV contract. And you're looking at them dude, you guys that pack 30 people into every home game when your students have to drive 45 miles to go there and you haven't poured any money into your football program in years now, and you made it rich off the pandemic with your hospital systems, and now you're going to dump all this money in here and act like you're swinging the big stick? Come on, man. Get out of here with that. Having said that, Miami, if you would like to come to the new Big 12, let me just tell you, you would be more than welcome in the new look Big 12. Come on down, baby. I would be very welcoming of that at the same time. But no, thank you for pointing that out, R Webb. I definitely need to go read that because that is pretty fascinating. And I would imagine that has to be the sentiment around the ACC in general. And this is why the tide may shift, I mean, as much crap as the Pac-12 has taken, we'll see what happens here. If Cristobal were still at Oregon, I think this would be an even more valid discussion. Is the ACC going to become the new Pac-12 and lowest on the pecking order? Cristobal leaving Oregon still makes me think I don't know. Pretty much every coach that's been there has been able to be successful. Oregon seems to be a program that has enough in place in terms of advantages relative to their peers and a fairly weak conference that every coach is going to have a decently high level of success there. So the table has been set for Dan Lanning as far as that goes. But I don't feel as good about him as I did Cristobal there just before he proves himself, obviously, as a head coach. But Cristobal was a 500 head coach before he took the Oregon job, and all of a sudden, he's winning 10 games. So could certainly happen. But, if Lincoln really gets USC turned around and they now have their big fish back ready to go, Clemson, man, I just think it'll be supremely interesting to see what happens with Dabo. You lose that unity that you have with an athletic director that you've worked very closely with for a long time, who saw the program rise up under Dabo, now leaving to go to Miami, and then you lose both coordinators in the same year. That's a lot. That is a lot for a program to deal with, even if you are Alabama. Even if you're the most smoothly run, well-oiled machine in college football, that's a lot of transition to take in. Now, Bama has proven Saban just moves those guys in and out, right? Takes the most talented guy he can at OC and DC, and they're always going to get hired somewhere else. So he can kind of do that and survive, and we've already seen that. But everywhere else, you're more of a mere mortal. And we've already seen the mortality of Clemson on display this year when they don't have the elite transcendent quarterback that they had in both Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence back to back. So now you couple that with losing your 2 coordinators, losing your athletic director. Do things take even just a step back? Because if we're talking about Clemson being 9-3, 10-2, if we're kind of talking about them being like Oklahoma of this year, and that's what the program's going to be year in and year out, well, that dramatically changes what the ACC is. Maybe not as much once the expanded playoff hits, because you'd figure they'd still get into the expanded playoff, but that's still a pretty dramatic hit in terms of losing like the one really premier brand. And Florida State, we'll see. I mean, it seems like there were some positive things happening this year, but being 5-7, 6-6 is a long way from being back to the national championship game. You know, they're a long ways from 2013. Miami did make what seems to be a pretty good hire, but Miami still has been a dysfunctional mess for as long as Texas has been. So what trust do we actually have in Miami turning that around? And the ACC, you know, if your best teams are going to be Wake Forest and Pitt, or even North Carolina, who had a lot of buzz before the season, and I know Matt Brown is kind of a name, but that's not going to be a draw, and that's not going to be a program that sustains it up at the top of that league. And the ACC has been the league pulling around as much dead weight as anybody. You know, that's what we continue to see from those computer rankings this year when, God, I'm spacing on his name. I apologize for this. The BYU guy, is it Jeff, who put together those composite computer rankings every single week. And it was the ACC was the one that really struggled on the average team rank because they had just so much crap at the bottom that they're dragging along. And I don't know. When the ACC doesn't have Clemson, Miami, or Florida State, like in the elite playoff conversation, there is not much of a draw there at all. In fairness, much like basically every league across college football, if you took out the top 2 or 3 brands, but they just have so much of it, and the numbers would show you that they're dragging along a lot, so they really need somebody to pull it all. You know, the Pac-12, not quite as big and bulky in terms of carrying that kind of crap down there at the bottom. So the ACC could be in a really tricky spot. And Dabo just is not – Dabo right at this point, one, has been doing it so long and at this level for so long that it can be hard, I think, for guys in that position to really change and adapt and evolve. And now he's being hit with, like, you have to change and adapt and evolve. Sorry about that. It's the tech police coming again. The tech police after me again. I'm sorry. Jeffrey Fuller. Thank you for that, guys. Jeffrey Fuller is the one who put out those rankings. Shout out to Jeffrey Fuller. But do we have confidence that Dabo at this stage, being faced with a downturn in the program for the first time in a while and now faced with losing these guys, can do it? I mean, this is somebody that was, he's not like on the cutting edge. He's not like cutting edge college football guy. Like Saban, willing and ready to embrace everything he can. Dabo was not willing and ready to embrace the portal. He thought Clemson was like above the portal. He's just kind of old school, set in his ways because it has worked to get him to the point that he's at. But that makes me wonder how much he can really change and adapt on the fly right now when already facing some adversity. And again, I know there's not going to be a lot of like Clemson fans in here that are going to get mad at me and push back on me on this point. But I think the pushback would be like, John, like, what are you saying? Like, Clemson is really going to fall? Like, look at what they've done. It's not just going to fall off. No, I don't think it's just going to fall off. I think we're talking about more like a gradual, slow burn here. It's the same theory that you would have about Oklahoma. And the question that I would have about Oklahoma is, like, do they turn into rich man's Nebraska in the SEC, where over the next 5-6 years, it kind of dwindles down to, okay, they're more like a 9-3 program instead of an 11-1 program. That's my question with Clemson. Does this start the deterioration to a 9-3 type of program and not an 11-1 ultra elite at the top of the college football game kind of program? That's the question that I have. Let me get to a couple of donations here. Appreciate Alpha Cat. Alpha Cat says, thanks for making my Sunday night better. Well, thank you, Alpha Cat. You just made my Sunday night better with the compliment there. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the kind words. And those of you guys that hang out here. And Marvin Lewis Rogers, thank you so much for the donation there. Really appreciate it. No message, but a nice sticker that looks very looks like that sticker has had a good Sunday night listening to the show here as well. So really appreciate that, and all you guys who are in here. Wolf 58, I think, makes a good point here. I think the Pac-12 has more opportunity for growth than the ACC, and I agree with you, because the other point here, to tie it back to the I'm sorry, I'm blanking on names, but whoever it was that donated and said, hey, check out this article about Miami and the ACC. Like, everybody's well aware of that TV contract that has them locked in to like a mid $30 million payout until 2035, right? Like a very meager a modest payout compared to the Big Ten and the SEC for the next like 13 years. So they're stuck. They're screwed unless they can negotiate something different. But I don't understand how that would really happen based on what the conference looks like right now. They got outdrawn by the AAC this year for their conference championship game. They're not in a strong position in terms of leverage right now to be trying to squeak anything out there. They have a pretty new commissioner as well. There are just a lot of pieces there that lead to a lot of uncertainty and unstableness. No, I don't know if that's a word, but a lack of stability really in the ACC at this point in time, where at the Pac-12, at least like you can sell me on being on the come up, mainly because of Lincoln Riley and USC. So there is a ton of pressure there on Lincoln to get it right and make it work at USC and make it work pretty fast. I will give you that. I will definitely give you that. And that is not a sure thing, but you can see the growth there. And with USC having the right guy, potentially, it's about as high as it gets in terms of upside in the sport, especially somebody that's already been really hitting it off, recruiting in SoCal the way that Lincoln has. So I'm with you. You know, it feels like Clemson is growing a little bit stale. It feels like Clemson is coming down to earth a little bit. And Miami, I don't think the crystal ball Miami ceiling is as high as it is at USC. You know, I've been listening to a lot of like Ari Wasserman of The Athletic and the recruiting Stars Matter recruiting podcast that they have. And he's really made that point that like Florida just has so much competition recruiting wise. Like, yes, you can come in if you're Miami and dominate Florida, dominate, you know, the city of Miami, the state of Miami, as they would call it, and put together a pretty good team. But there's just so much competition in there right now, with recruiting being more national than it was back in the 80s and 90s when Miami really started dominating by taking a bunch of kids from there. So I don't think it's as much like snap your fingers and just make it happen. There's just simply less competition out there for SC and Lincoln Riley, especially when you have the brand of SC backing you. So yeah, I think there is a definite case for that Wolf 58 that the Pac-12 has higher upside right now, and that the ACC would be in real trouble. And I just use this as a gauge. Like, I've got a buddy, and again, really good friend and in the business, and a great, just very, very talented guy as well, who does a radio show in Winston-Salem. And he just gave me a little pushback on Twitter on my comment that I said, like, hey, man, watch out. The ACC may become the new Pac-12. And he was saying, look, how can you say that when the Big 12 just lost the only playoff coach that they had and Oklahoma leaving? And I was like, well, man, that doesn't really matter that much, because we're talking about the new Big 12, which, again, by all the metrics and rankings this year, yes, sure, 1 year, but it's been well ahead of the ACC. And now can Dabo deal with change? Just the reaction told me that, like, I'm using this as a generalized pulse of the ACC, but I think like the ACC feels this a little bit. The ACC realizes what's going on. Yes, it's a cool story to see Pitt and Wake in the ACC championship game. And those actually were two pretty fun teams to watch this year, if you're somebody that's really paying attention to the game. But it's not a good thing for the league to have those two teams playing for the championship. It's just not. Okay. Two things I'm going to say here. I'm going to do just a couple more minutes. But two things that I'm going to say here. If you could all like the video, everybody that's in here, if you could like the video right now, I would really appreciate it. Helps with the algorithm, helps get those numbers up. If you could like the video, and if you do want to sneak in a question or comment, make sure it gets to my attention here in the last few minutes. You can do so by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something to make a donation. If you want to do it out of the goodness of your heart, you can do that as well here before I get on out of here. Let's see. I see John Drew. OU is out recruiting Florida schools in Florida. Yeah, I mean, the doors have been wide open because Miami, Florida State, and Florida have all been pretty down. And, you know, now Billy Napier at Florida, I would imagine, is going to recruit a little bit harder than Dan Mullen was there. So you're going to have to deal with that if you're crystal ball at Miami. You know, Florida State, we'll see. But it seems like some strides were being made there with what they did in the second half of the season this year, and basically after that loss to Jacksonville State. And then, you know, I mean, like Alabama has been very productive in recruiting the state of Florida as well. Like Georgia, you're gonna have to fight off so many SEC schools there. And crystal ball, I know that he is insanely well connected to Miami guy, Miami to the core. I'm sure he's going to get plenty of players, but the competition has certainly stepped up there. So I digress. D'Angelo, are you a Texas fan? Or are you an Oklahoma fan? I just got here, John. Don't be jealous, bud. I don't know what that. I would guess because of what did I title the video? It was about Quinn Ewers, right? So I actually was not. I was not hating on Texas for the Quinn Ewers thing. You'll have to go back and watch at the beginning of it if you're a Texas fan, but definitely not hating on Texas getting Quinn Ewers. I think there's a really good chance of him being pretty good. And Sark has proven that with elite talent, he certainly can make that work. I do think there are questions about, is Quinn Ewers damaged goods right now from the experience that he had at Ohio State? But yeah, look, no hating on it at all. No hating on it at all. I will just say this, D'Angelo. One of the most condescending things you can do as a human being is call somebody else bud, and you've now done it twice. So, bud, maybe just be a little careful with that, bud. One of the most I would be curious. Everybody's this takes me back to like the radio show days, getting into more topics like this, and branching off just purely sports stuff there. But there's not much that I hate more than being called bud by somebody. Or there was another one when I was like walking by at somebody at the gas station the other day. Somebody dropped another one of those, like pal. I think maybe pal was another one that I was called recently, where I was just like, man, that's just such a condescending thing to say to somebody. Such a condescending thing to say, like you cute little bud over there. No, man, you don't call somebody bud. You don't call somebody bud. You just don't do it. Jeremy, don't call me buddy, guy. Yeah, I'm not your friend, guy. That South Park bit about friend, guy, and buddy is one of my favorite TV moments in history. Good. Thank you for that in the chat today. Thank you for that. I think we need to just wrap it up there. Got a little laugh out of that. It's been fun. It's been lively tonight. Thank you guys for hanging out here, even in what's basically an off-season show. What up, Haas? Haas is a good one. Haas is a very good one. What up, Haas? Oh, man. Okay. Maybe we can try it, man. We can try and bring some more of those sorts of topics in here to the table, too, since we don't have as much football going on these days. Take care, guys. I'll be back at it with some more content this week, hoping to work on getting a guest or two on this week to provide some extra content for you. And, yes, to all my buds out there, all you buds, have a wonderful night. Have a great week coming up, and I will talk to you guys soon.